In our present day economy, more and more data is stored online, whether it is through online transactions or the use of cloud products. We've all had those moments, perhaps in a weak emotional state with the right Instagram ad, where we start to process a transaction but don't feel great regarding the security of our data or where we are sending it. For a brief second, try to think of an example in which you felt the opposite, where you didn't have any hesitation in the data you're providing, a place or company that you totally trust. Now, how many of you thought of the place you work for? Interesting, right? We make these types of professional and personal decisions every day. For example, think about the types of choices you make when buying groceries for yourself or your family. In the 1990s, we made choices based on ease. Processed food and microwave meals were the main focus. This resulted in an increase of chronic diseases, which pushed yet another shift as the food industry pivoted its focus on health and natural ingredients. As we continue to battle climate change, we've also started to consider the global impact of our purchasing choices. Now people naturally gravitate towards labels that note something is organic or ethically farmed. This creates a boom in certifications and validations in the food industry. Hopefully, this gives you some familiarity with what customer trust feels like. Customer trust is so important because it is an innate feeling that all humans experience and it drives competitiveness. Quicker access to data and increased product reviews allow customers to compare products easily. With more information easily accessible, customers have become more demanding in all factors of the purchasing process. When asked why they choose to do business with a particular company, consumers give a variety of reasons from price and ease of the buying process to simply having the product they want in stock. However, one factor that drives belief in all variables and thus the actual purchasing decisions is trust. Consumers must believe the company will live up to their promises. Though the importance of trust has increased, actual customer trust has recently been on the decline. In the tech industry, it's declined at an even greater rate. Looking at industry trends, one statistic remains consistent: decreasing consumer trust in the technology industry as a whole. One report, the 2020-2001 Edelman Trust Barometer, reported technology trust's 10-year trend as negative 9%. Some of the factors that lead to this decline include an increase in actual incidents. Breaches are increasing in frequency as well as in size. Billions of records are reported stolen just in one calendar year. In 2020 alone, there were more than 3,000 publicly reported breaches. As more people are impacted, the fear also increases. To put it in perspective, recent studies noted that people were just as fearful of being hacked as they were of contracting COVID-19. So today, my GRC colleague Amani Tate is here with me to leverage our expertise in the world of information security compliance to talk about why customer trust is so important and how you can utilize the information from your governance, risk, and compliance programs to make strategic and better informed decisions. So now, let's head over to our fake company, Mindtech. I will hand it over to Amani to talk about the importance of customer trust in the technology industry as we explore a revolutionary company as they work through this topic.
It's the year 2200. Mindtech is very trendy right now and is in a constant battle with Superbrain Corp to control the Internet of Thinking market. Mindtech sells top-tier mind control devices. As screens became out of style, people began to look for other ways to add convenience to their lives. With the Internet of Thinking, everything from turning on your toaster to planning your next vacation can be done from the comfort of your own mind. But there's been a recent wave of concerning events in the market that have led to a decrease in trust with the Internet of Thinking world. A couple prominent news articles have come out regarding seizures, criminal activity where hackers have stolen very important information from the minds of their victims, and nation states using mind control devices to spy on other countries. As a result, several markets have begun to tighten the regulation around this new technology. As these regulations increased, so did overhead. Morale among developers dipped. Processes that were once cutting edge now are becoming even more burdened by bureaucracy, and the organization lacked direction about where to go from here. Compliance became a reality for Mindtech, and it needed a strategy to demonstrate its clear value add and instill a greater sense of purpose in its technical staff. We're going to spend the next several minutes talking about how Mindtech began developing its governance, risk, and compliance strategy in order to keep up the company's momentum in the Internet of Thinking space in spite of recent events.
Wow, I'm already at the edge of my seat as to what will happen next. Now that we have a real life example of how customer trust impacts the business, hopefully it's easier to see how your compliance program is tied to the revenue generating side of the business. This allows various ways to leverage GRC as an opportunity for increased profitability and efficiency across the organization. Customizing your governance, risk, and compliance program around your industry, regulatory environment, and product is critical to creating a program that will be valuable to all stakeholders. Let's dive into what we mean by that. One way a GRC program can provide trust and value is through identifying metrics around the return on investment for certifications. This tracks directly how your compliance efforts are related to your sales and market growth. Let's go back and visit Amani at Mindtech to see what this looks like for them.
Mindtech has three product areas. They serve the healthcare, advertising, and intelligence industries. Recently, reports about negative incidents related to health, theft of personal information, and malicious nation-state activity have surfaced, making the products in these markets compete heavily on consumer trust. In response to this, Mindtech has been considering two different approaches. The first approach is, because they're competing on trust, to see what their competitors are doing and aim for the most certifications in the largest available market. During the first couple of years, this would mean pursuing 4 different certifications in the healthcare industry that have very similar uplifts for technical resources and time of certification for each. This will show customers that they're able to keep up with the rapid compliance demands of the industry at the same pace as Superbrain Corp. The second approach is, because the overall business strategy has been very focused on the advertising industry, and it's done very well for the business's bottom line, and because they're very closely tied to customer needs within this industry, they have a really good grasp on the additional products that can be sold once they achieve just one critical certification that has been requested multiple times over. Ultimately, Mindtech decided on the second approach and prioritized the company's overall business strategy and customer needs over the accomplishments of their competitor. Here's what we took into consideration when determining metrics that were important to Mindtech. We were already thinking about metrics like number of certifications, technical uplift, time of certification, and the industries their competitors cared about. But there were so many other metrics that were not being taken into consideration that helped us provide even greater sense of direction for the overall compliance strategy. Mindtech thought about the expected additional revenue per year per certification, which adds a necessary quantitative element to the analysis when done correctly. The unexpected impacts to timeline, team morale, and ongoing personnel resources required when choosing the number of certifications to pursue was also something that was taken into account. Since these things can come with hidden costs, they aren't considered along with the initial uplift to obtain the certification. And lastly, Mindtech thought beyond just what the competitors were working to achieve and tied the compliance strategy as closely as possible to the current business strategy so they could provide the most value add to ongoing efforts to capitalize on existing markets and capture new opportunities. After all was said and done, Mindtech was confident in their path forward. There was a plan to execute and metrics to help inform the decision making for the future.
Wow. Identifying a certification strategy is a great way to provide third-party comfort that your compliance programs meet a baseline of security. However, they can be so much more. Thinking about the maturity scale of your compliance program is another way to look at your program efficiency and how you are helping to reduce compliance costs within the organization. Let's go hang out with Amani again to see how Mindtech's compliance program maturity impacts its business costs.
So Mindtech decided to go with the advertising industry certification based on metrics it collected for the certification's return on investment. They were successful in obtaining the certification and implementing the controls necessary to achieve compliance. Great work. But after becoming compliant, the reality sunk in. These controls weren't just implemented for an initial audit, but they are expected to continue their ongoing maintenance for the lifetime of the product. The initial overhead that was tacked on to the developers and engineers working on the product wasn't doing the team any favors. What they didn't realize was that they were so concerned about achieving compliance that they hadn't thought about the overall maturity of the program, and the opportunity to create efficiencies just needed to be taken advantage of. This is where thinking about the Mindtech compliance program in terms of maturity came in. Maturity levels of security programs often range from an ad hoc level 1 maturity level up to a level 5 maturity level, where the program's processes are repeatable, defined, well documented, monitored on a regular basis with meaningful metrics, and improved upon. The best example of this is the neurotransmitter feature of the latest release of Mindtech's best-selling mind control device. The neurotransmitter observes customers' reactions to various things in their environment and makes recommendations based on the greatest value and lowest price for every task, from decorating a room to fixing your plumbing. Customers can then purchase new items on the spot. One of the controls that Mindtech has had to implement for their neurotransmitter were configuration rules to control the thoughts into and out of the brain to make sure the data is protected, the functionality is tested, and that there are permissions in place to only allow the customer to configure these rules. Mindtech is currently in what we'd call the initial maturity level of their neurotransmitters. They design them according to the controls required by the advertising industry. They build the neurotransmitters according to the design, deploy them, and make them available to the public. The first thing they did to make implementing this control more efficient was to figure out a way to make it more repetitive and a documented, defined process. As new versions and models of neurotransmitters were designed and released, the configuration rules, testing, and permissions were all defined and standardized as much as possible. This made it possible to mature their neurotransmitter controls even further. They developed metrics for how often the configurations fail as a security control and how frequently their tests have successful outcomes. The collection and analysis of these metrics was all automated to provide the most informed decision on how well the controls were working and when they needed to be adjusted according to their environment. Ultimately, the security controls for the neurotransmitters worked much more effectively with fewer resources to manage them, making them not only more secure, but more efficient, with the metrics to prove the cost savings that come along with maturity. But how do we actually approach maturing our program in the long run? Mindtech started with critically thinking about risk.
I don't know what got into my brain, but something is telling me that the final area we should talk about today is information risk management. So, risk is a word that is used so frequently, it can often become conflated or confusing. When it comes to information security risk management, you can focus on the potential threats to your organization and how to manage them. A strong risk management program starts by identifying where you have sensitive data flows. You can then analyze relevant threats by looking at current trends, both internal and external, as well as your control vulnerabilities. This will allow you to identify key risks and provide the entire organization with data-driven information, which will allow them to make proactive and strategic choices when it comes to budgeting various initiatives. Still don't feel really clear on information risk? Let's get back to Amani and look at some of Mindtech's risks and how they use this information.
So it turns out that convincing leadership that saving money by increasing maturity and efficiency with security controls was the easy part. The hard part was getting the budget approval to do it. Mindtech was left with two options. The first option was to attempt to reach the same level of maturity across the entire environment, so they could spend the time and resources to make sure that everything is at least repeatable and defined. The second option is to make a risk-based decision and mature controls to an optimized level where it counts the most. These would be for risks that are identified as high, leaving the lows to be addressed later. It was clear that certain aspects of the product were worthy of more investment than others, but what wasn't clear was how to determine that in a way that was as objective as possible. While the most attractive choice, the risk-based decision made in option 2 wasn't going to come about without a proper analysis. Mindtech had to determine which risks were most relevant to their mind control devices, the impact that risk would have if it happened, and how likely it would happen at all. For example, after collecting customer reactions, there's a recommendations engine within each mind control device that processes the information and returns a recommendation for what the customer should consider buying. This engine doesn't store any of the reactions, and the data is anonymized once it reaches the engine for processing. If this particular part of the product were to be compromised, it would return a bad recommendation or no recommendation at all, which would have a moderate impact to the product's reputation because It's up to the customer whether they buy it or not, so bad recommendations would just be annoying or useless and would have a moderate likelihood of happening. On the other hand, if the neurotransmitter permissions engine is compromised, an intruder could have access to customers' thoughts. They could reroute them or even compromise the integrity of the thoughts themselves. This could cause irreparable damage to the company's brand. The impact of this happening would be catastrophic, even if the same moderate likelihood of the recommendation engine being compromised. It's clear that this particular risk needs to be mitigated, and security controls need to be applied to lower the likelihood of something like this ever taking place. A big chunk of the company's resources needs to be dedicated to this, protecting the neurotransmitter permissions engine at all costs. This allowed Mindtech to make a proactive choice to focus its resources to mitigate the most catastrophic risk, which resulted in the strategic use of financial resources that increase information security while also supporting Mindtech's long-term business growth. The elements of governance, risk, and compliance that we discussed today all serve to protect Mindtech's customers and increase customer trust.
Wow, we were so close to being subject to some serious mind control. As we've seen today at Mindtech, GRC has been a key component in many strategic business choices. We saw an analysis of uplift and market return on investment, which allowed Mindtech to choose which industry to focus on as it scales. With the expansion of its compliance requirements, Mindtech then implemented information security controls. These most importantly served to ethically secure their customer data and had the added benefit of creating efficiencies and cost savings as controls were automated and leveraged in future growth. Lastly, we looked at how Mindtech's information risk program allowed them to make informed business decisions that better manage their overall risk while aligning to their business needs and financial strategy. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Hopefully, you've been able to see the governance, risk, and compliance function from a new perspective.
We hope that you can take some of these examples and incorporate them into your teams wherever you are in your governance, risk, and compliance journey. So thanks.
Thank you.